I watched in complete horror as my parents publicly humiliated my 16-year-old daughter Emma on their front porch. After she had flown 6 hours from California to Michigan for their 50th wedding anniversary, my mother Margaret looked Emma straight in the eyes and declared, "We've decided you're not family anymore." Emma stood there in her carefully chosen dress, holding a handmade scrapbook shed spent weeks creating, as relatives arriving for the celebration witnessed her devastation. My father Robert nodded approvingly while guests whispered and stared. This wasn't spontaneous cruelty. This was calculated, deliberate public humiliation designed to permanently destroy my daughter's sense of belonging in our family. I felt my hands trembling as I followed my parents inside their house, leaving Emma with my sister-in-law Susan on the porch. The familiar scent of my mother's lavender potpourri and my father's pipe tobacco filled the hallway, but nothing about this moment felt familiar or safe. The anniversary decorations hung throughout their home like a mockery of family celebration, while my daughter stood outside, rejected and heartbroken. "What is wrong with you people?" I confronted them in their pristine kitchen, where golden anniversary cards lined the granite countertops. "How could you do that to Emma in front of everyone?" My mother Margaret turned from arranging flowers, her perfectly styled gray hair not moving despite her sharp movements. At 72, she maintained the same intimidating presence that had controlled our household when I was growing up. "Jennifer, we've been more than patient with that girl's behavior. It's time someone set proper boundaries." "What behavior?" I demanded. "Emma is a straight-A student who's never been in trouble. She spent her own babysitting money on plane tickets to be here for you." My father, Robert, emerged from the dining room adjusting his anniversary boutonniere. At 74, he still commanded attention when he entered a room, his voice carrying the authority he wielded as president of the local Chamber of Commerce. "Your daughter has shown us nothing but disrespect for years. She's ungrateful, difficult, and frankly, she's not really one of us anyway." The casual cruelty in his voice made my stomach drop. "Not one of us?" "She's your granddaughter. She's the child of a woman who couldn't keep a husband," Margaret said, her words cutting like ice. "We've tried to overlook that unfortunate beginning, but Emma has never appreciated what we've done for her. Today, we decided to make our position clear." I realized something chilling. They weren't angry or emotional. They were calm, calculated, almost pleased with themselves. Instinctively, I reached into my purse and activated my phone's recording app, sliding it partially out so the microphone could pick up our conversation clearly. "What exactly has Emma done that's so terrible?" I asked, keeping my voice steady while my heart pounded. Margaret exchanged a knowing look with Robert before continuing. "She's been disrespectful during our phone calls, rolling her eyes when we give her advice. She didn't thank us properly for the $50 check we sent for her birthday. And frankly, Jennifer, she's gotten too comfortable thinking she belongs in this family. We've been telling everyone the truth about her behavior," Robert added, settling into his favorite armchair like he was delivering a business presentation. "Your brother David needed to know why we don't include her in family photos anymore. Your cousins have been asking questions about her attitude. We've been honest about what kind of child she is." The room seemed to spin around me. "What kind of things have you been telling people about Emma?" "The truth," Margaret said matter-of-factly. "That she's difficult, that she has behavioral problems, that she's not really family in the way our other grandchildren are. We've run a family therapy practice for 30 years, Jennifer. We know a troubled child when we see one." My recording app continued capturing every word, as they detailed their systematic campaign against my daughter. They explained how they'd been laying groundwork for today's public rejection for months, preparing relatives to witness what they called Emma's inevitable emotional outburst when she was denied entry. "Today we're finally being honest about where she stands in this family. She's not our granddaughter in any way that matters. Everyone out there will see exactly what kind of person she really is when she has her meltdown," Robert added. "We've prepared them for this moment. They know she's been a problem child." As their words continued, I realized Emma had been fighting an invisible war her entire life. Every family gathering where she felt slightly excluded, every phone call that ended awkwardly, every family photo she wasn't included in, none of it had been accidental. My parents had been systematically poisoning her relationships with extended family while presenting themselves as the long-suffering grandparents of a difficult child. The recording app on my phone captured every admission, every calculated detail of their campaign against my daughter. They had no idea that in 30 minutes, their entire carefully constructed world would begin crumbling around them. Looking at their satisfied faces as they described their plan to humiliate Emma, I felt something cold and determined settle in my chest. They had underestimated both my daughter's worth and my willingness to protect her. They were about to learn that their granddaughter had a mother who would move mountains to defend her. The anniversary celebration was about to become something entirely different than what they had planned. I stepped onto the back patio, my hands steady despite the fury coursing through my veins. The late afternoon Michigan sun cast long shadows across my parents' perfectly manicured garden, but I barely noticed the beauty they took such pride in. My mind was focused entirely on the phone in my hands and the nuclear option I was about to deploy. Opening Facebook, I uploaded the 13-minute recording I had just captured. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I typed a caption that would change everything. My parents own Harmony Family Counseling in Grand Rapids, Michigan. They're both licensed family therapists who counsel other families about love, acceptance, and healthy relationships. Today, they refused to let my 16-year-old daughter into their home after she flew 6 hours to attend their anniversary celebration. This is the conversation I recorded immediately afterward, where they admit to years of systematically lying to our family about Emma's character. Listen to how family therapists really talk about their own granddaughter. I tagged their business page, their church, the Grand Rapids Chamber of Commerce where my father served as president, and every family member I could think of. Then I shared the same post to Instagram, adding relevant hashtags about family therapy, ethics, and child abuse. Finally, I posted it to TikTok with the caption, "Family therapists who destroy families. The shocking truth." The first response came within 2 minutes. My cousin Sarah in California commented, "Wait, what? Mom and Dad have been telling us Emma was on drugs and failing school. This doesn't sound like the same kid." Then my Uncle Tom from Florida, "Margaret told me Emma stole money from her purse last Christmas. Are you saying that wasn't true?" My phone started buzzing with notifications as the video spread through our family network. But it was my college roommate Lisa's comment that made my breath catch. "Jen, my sister works for the state licensing board. This is exactly the kind of thing they investigate. Professional therapists can't target children like this." Within 20 minutes, the post had 50 shares and hundreds of comments. The local Grand Rapids community Facebook groups had picked it up, with people expressing shock that the respected Harmony Family Counseling owners could speak about a child with such calculated cruelty. Then came the comment that changed everything. "Jennifer, this is Dr. Patricia Wells. I was a client of your parents' practice 3 years ago. They convinced me to cut contact with my adopted daughter, claiming she had attachment disorders. After listening to your recording, I'm realizing they told me the same lies they told your family about Emma. Can we talk?" My phone rang immediately. Dr. Wells, a local pediatrician, explained through tears that my parents had manipulated her into believing her adopted daughter was dangerous and unlovable. They made me feel like protecting my other children meant rejecting her. I sent my own daughter away because I believed their professional assessment. She was only 12 years old. The calls kept coming. Janet Morrison, whose family had been torn apart after my parents convinced her husband that their son needed to be institutionalized. David Fletcher, who had paid thousands for family therapy sessions where my parents systematically convinced him that his teenage daughter was beyond help. "They have a pattern," David told me, his voice shaking. "They target single parents, adoptive families, blended families, anyone they consider non-traditional. Then they use their credentials to convince us our children are problems that need to be eliminated from the family unit." As evening approached, my social media post had gone viral locally. The Grand Rapids news stations were calling, asking for interviews about the family therapy scandal. My parents' business page was flooded with negative reviews from former clients who were finally connecting the dots about their experiences. But it was Emma who delivered the most devastating blow. She had spent the afternoon reading comments from family members who were learning the truth about the lies they'd been told. Standing in the hotel room, Wed booked after leaving my parents' house, she looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Mom," Aunt Linda commented that Grandma told her I was cutting myself and using drugs. Uncle Mark said Grandpa showed him fake photos of me at parties, claiming I was drinking. They've been telling everyone I'm some kind of juvenile delinquent for years. The scope of the character assassination was breathtaking. My parents had created an entire fictional version of Emma, a troubled, dangerous, unlovable child who justified their rejection. They had poisoned her relationships with cousins, aunts, uncles, and family friends she'd never even met. Every awkward family interaction, every relative who seemed distant or uncomfortable around her, suddenly made perfect sense. Great Aunt Dorothy commented too. Emma continued, scrolling through her phone. She said Grandma told her I was sexually promiscuous, and that you couldn't control me. Mom, I've never even kissed anyone. I didn't understand why she always looked at me like I was dirty when I visited her. The criminal nature of what my parents had done was becoming clear. They hadn't just rejected Emma, they had systematically destroyed her reputation and relationships throughout our extended family network. They had used their professional credentials and community standing to spread lies that painted a 16-year-old honor student as a dangerous deviant. My phone buzzed with a text from my brother David in Colorado. Jen, I need to call you. After seeing your post, I'm realizing Mom and Dad told me completely different stories about you and Emma. I think we've both been manipulated. But it was the call from WGRZ News that confirmed the full scope of what was happening. Reporter Amanda Chen had been following the story as it spread through social media. Jennifer, we've received calls from 12 families who say your parents' therapy practice destroyed their relationships with their children. This appears to be a pattern of professional misconduct spanning years. Would you be willing to go on record about what happened? As I looked at Emma, who was reading message after message from relatives apologizing for believing lies about her, I knew there was no going back. My parents had declared war on my daughter, using their professional position and family authority as weapons. They had underestimated the power of truth and the fierce love of a mother protecting her child. The video that was supposed to show Emma having an emotional breakdown had instead exposed my parents as fraudulent therapists who destroyed families for their own twisted satisfaction. In 30 minutes, their reputation had begun crumbling. By morning, it would be completely destroyed. But this was only the beginning of the justice that was coming for them. The next morning brought revelations that turned my stomach and confirmed my worst fears about the scope of my parents' cruelty. Dr. Patricia Wells had spent the night reaching out to other former clients of Harmony Family Counseling, and what she discovered made Emma's situation look like just the tip of an iceberg. Jennifer, you need to meet with us, Patricia said when she called at 7 in the morning. We found 16 families who had similar experiences with your parents' practice. This isn't just unprofessional behavior. It's systematic abuse of their position. I met Patricia and 5 other former clients at a coffee shop downtown, Emma beside me as we listened to stories that grew more horrifying with each account. Margaret and Robert hadn't just targeted our family. They had been running what amounted to a systematic scheme to separate vulnerable children from their parents, while profiting from the destruction. Janet Morrison, a single mother of 3, described how my parents convinced her that her middle son was inherently violent and needed to be removed from the home immediately. They said if I didn't send him to live with his father in another state, he would hurt my other children. I believed them because they were licensed professionals. My son was 11 years old. I haven't seen him in 4 years. David Fletcher's story was even worse. My parents had convinced him and his wife that their adopted teenage daughter was manipulating their biological children and planning to hurt them. Dr. Margaret showed us research about adopted children being more likely to become violent. We sent our daughter back to foster care based on their recommendation. She aged out of the system alone because we believed their lies. The pattern was sickeningly clear. My parents specifically targeted non-traditional families, used their professional credentials to manufacture crises that didn't exist, then convinced parents that removing certain children was necessary for family safety and stability. They had torn apart dozens of families while collecting thousands in therapy fees. But Patricia's next revelation made my blood run cold. Jennifer, we think they've been committing insurance fraud too. They billed my insurance for family therapy sessions that never happened, claiming they were providing ongoing treatment for my daughter's behavioral disorders long after I stopped bringing her to appointments. Emma looked up from her phone where she'd been reading more messages from relatives. Mom, cousin Jessica just texted me. She said Grandma and Grandpa told her parents that I was seeing a therapist for severe behavioral problems and that insurance was covering it. But I've never been to therapy in my life. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My parents had been billing insurance companies for fake therapy sessions with Emma, using her name and social security number to commit fraud while simultaneously spreading lies about her mental health. They had turned their own granddaughter into a source of illegal income while destroying her reputation. "We need to get into their office," I said, my legal training from my paralegal certification kicking in. I still have keys because I'm listed as their emergency contact for the business. If they're billing for services that don't exist, there will be records. That afternoon, I legally accessed Harmony Family Counseling using my emergency contact authorization. What I found in their files made me physically ill. Emma's name appeared on dozens of insurance claims over the past 3 years. Claims for individual therapy, family therapy, and behavioral intervention services that had never been provided. They had been using her identity to steal thousands of dollars from insurance companies while telling everyone she was a mentally ill problem child. But the files revealed something even worse. My parents had been specifically targeting single mothers, adoptive families, foster families, and blended families in their practice. They maintained detailed notes about family vulnerabilities, financial situations, and insurance coverage. They had weaponized their professional training to identify and exploit the most vulnerable families in our community. In Emma's fabricated file, I found documentation of supposed behavioral incidents that had never occurred, therapy notes for sessions that never happened, and treatment plans for disorders she didn't have. They had created an entire fictional mental health history for their own granddaughter while billing insurance companies for fake treatment. "Look at this," Emma said, reading over my shoulder at a particularly disturbing entry. "They wrote that I have oppositional defiant disorder with aggressive tendencies toward family members. Mom, I've never even raised my voice at them. The most rebellious thing I've ever done is forget to call them on their birthdays. The fake medical records explained so much. When relatives seemed uncomfortable around Emma, when teachers occasionally asked if she needed counseling resources, when family friends made odd comments about her being difficult, they had been responding to lies my parents spread about her having diagnosed mental health problems. But it was the financial records that revealed the full scope of their criminal enterprise. My parents had been billing insurance companies for hundreds of thousands of dollars in fake services over the past 5 years. They had used dozens of children's identities, including Emma's, to create fraudulent claims while simultaneously convincing families that these same children were problems that needed to be eliminated. "Jennifer," Patricia called, having stayed to help search through files. "You need to see this folder." She handed me a manila folder labeled Estate Planning Consultation, Emma Jennifer Thompson. Inside were documents I had never seen before, including what appeared to be my signature on forms transferring Emma's inheritance from my deceased grandmother to my parents' control. "I never signed these," I told Patricia, my voice shaking as I examined the forged signatures. "My grandmother left Emma a $50,000 education fund. My parents told me it was tied up in legal complications, but they've been stealing from her for years." Emma's face went white as she realized the full extent of what had been taken from her. Not only had my parents destroyed her family relationships and used her identity for insurance fraud, they had also stolen her inheritance and been using her social security number to open credit accounts in her name. "Mom," Emma said quietly, checking her phone again. "I just got an alert from that credit monitoring app you set up for me. There are 4 credit cards opened in my name that I never applied for. The balances total almost $30,000. My parents hadn't just rejected Emma from the family, they had been systematically robbing her blind while using their professional position to cover their tracks. They had turned their own granddaughter into both a victim and an unwitting accomplice in multiple federal crimes." As I photographed document after document with my phone, building a case that would bring federal investigators to our small Michigan town, I realized that my parents' cruelty ran deeper than I had ever imagined. They hadn't just targeted Emma out of spite. They had been operating a sophisticated criminal enterprise that destroyed vulnerable families while generating illegal income. The viral video had been just the beginning. The real justice was about to begin, and it would involve federal investigators, insurance fraud units, and protective services agencies that took crimes against children very seriously. My parents thought they had destroyed Emma's place in our family. Instead, they had exposed themselves as criminals who had been preying on vulnerable children for years. The tables were about to turn in ways they never saw coming. The federal investigators moved faster than I had ever imagined possible. By Tuesday morning, just 4 days after the anniversary celebration, Agent Sarah Martinez from the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division was sitting in our hotel room, reviewing the evidence I had gathered from Harmony Family Counseling. Mrs. Thompson, what you've uncovered appears to be a sophisticated fraud operation that spans multiple federal jurisdictions, Agent Martinez explained, scrolling through photos of the forged documents and insurance claims on my laptop. Identity theft, insurance fraud, mail fraud, and wire fraud. We're looking at potential federal charges that could result in decades of prison time. Emma sat beside me, still processing the magnitude of what her grandparents had done to her. The credit report we had obtained that morning showed 7 fraudulent accounts opened in her name over the past 3 years, with total debt exceeding $40,000. Her credit score, which should have been clean at age 16, was completely destroyed. The inheritance theft alone constitutes grand larceny. Agent Martinez continued. But using your daughter's social security number to open credit accounts elevates this to federal identity theft charges. The insurance fraud, based on preliminary calculations, exceeds $200,000 across multiple insurance providers. My phone buzzed with another call from a former client of my parents' practice. Over the past 3 days, the number had grown to 28 families who had been manipulated into separating from their children based on my parents' fabricated assessments. The FBI had opened a full investigation into Harmony Family Counseling, with agents interviewing victims across 3 states. But it was Dr. Patricia Wells who delivered the news that made Emma's face light up for the first time in days. Jennifer, I've been in contact with the other parents whose children were affected by your parents' scheme. We're organizing a legal fund to help families reunite with children who were separated based on false information. Emma won't be the only young person getting justice from this. The state licensing board had moved with unprecedented speed, immediately suspending my parents' therapy licenses pending investigation. The Grand Rapids Chamber of Commerce had removed my father from his position as president. Their church had asked them to step down from their leadership roles. In less than a week, the community standing they had spent decades building was completely gone. That afternoon, Agent Martinez called with news that made my heart race. We've obtained search warrants for your parents' home and business. We're executing them tomorrow morning. Given the evidence you've provided, we expect to find additional victims and more extensive financial crimes. But my parents weren't going quietly. That evening, they made their final, desperate play for control. Margaret called me, her voice shaking with rage rather than remorse. Jennifer, if you don't stop this investigation immediately, well, petition for emergency custody of Emma. We have professional colleagues who will testify that you're mentally unstable and that Emma needs protection from your vindictive behavior. The audacity of their threat was breathtaking. After years of abuse, fraud, and character assassination, they were threatening to take Emma away from me as punishment for exposing their crimes. You're welcome to try, I replied calmly, knowing that Agent Martinez was recording our conversation. I'd love to see you explain to a family court judge why you committed identity theft against the child you're claiming to protect. Robert got on the phone, his voice carrying the pompous authority that had intimidated me as a child. We have documentation of Emma's behavioral problems spanning years. We have professional assessments indicating she's dangerous and unstable. No judge will leave her in the custody of a mother who's clearly having a mental breakdown. Emma grabbed the phone from my hand. For the first time since this nightmare began, my daughter's voice was strong and clear. Grandpa, those documents you're talking about? The FBI has copies of all of them. They know you made up every single story about my behavior. They know you stole my inheritance, destroyed my credit, and used my identity to commit federal crimes. If you try to take me away from my mother, you'll just be adding another felony to your growing list. The silence on the other end of the line was profound. The whole family knows the truth now, Emma continued, her confidence growing with each word. All those lies you told about me being a drug user and a thief? Everyone knows you made them up. All those therapy bills you submitted claiming I was your patient? The insurance companies are investigating every single claim. You don't get to hurt me anymore. When my parents hung up without another word, Emma looked at me with tears in her eyes, but they were tears of relief rather than pain. Mom, for the first time in my life, I understand why family gatherings always felt so weird. It wasn't my imagination that relatives treated me differently. It wasn't my fault that Grandma and Grandpa never seemed to love me the way they loved my cousins. They were systematically poisoning every relationship I had before I was old enough to defend myself. The next morning, we watched from across the street as FBI agents executed search warrants at my parents' home and office. News vans lined their normally quiet street as federal investigators carried boxes of evidence from the house where Emma had spent so many uncomfortable holidays, never understanding why she felt unwelcome. Agent Martinez called that afternoon with preliminary results. We found evidence of fraud involving 47 families and over 60 children. Your parents have been operating this scheme for at least 8 years. Emma was just one of many children whose identities they exploited, but her case appears to be the most extensive due to their family access. But it was the final revelation that showed the true scope of their criminal thinking. Hidden in my father's home office, investigators found a journal where he had documented his philosophy about correcting social problems through strategic family intervention. He had written detailed plans for identifying and eliminating what he considered defective children from family units, viewing himself as providing a valuable service to society. Your father saw himself as improving families by convincing parents to abandon children he deemed unworthy, Agent Martinez explained. He kept detailed notes about which children he considered genetic dead ends and how to convince families to reject them. Emma's entries show he targeted her specifically because she was born to a single mother. The journal entries about Emma were filled with clinical language about correcting genetic mistakes and protecting family bloodlines from contamination. My father had viewed his own granddaughter as a problem to be solved rather than a child to be loved. As federal marshals arrested my parents that Friday morning, exactly 1 week after their anniversary celebration, Emma stood beside me watching through our hotel window. The two people who had spent years trying to convince the world that she was worthless and dangerous were being led away in handcuffs while she remained free, vindicated, and finally protected. "Mom," Emma said quietly, "I used to think something was wrong with me because I never felt comfortable around them. Now I know something was wrong with them because they could never love a child the way grandparents are supposed to." The legal consequences were just beginning, but the emotional victory was already complete. Emma finally understood that the problem had never been her behavior, her worth, or her place in the family. The problem had been two dangerous adults who used their positions of authority to harm children while profiting from the destruction they caused. Justice was coming, and it would be swift, comprehensive, and final. My brother David arrived from Colorado on Saturday morning, his face grim as he parked his rental car outside our hotel. I hadn't seen him in 3 years. Not since my parents convinced him that Emma was a bad influence on his twin daughters. As he walked toward us in the hotel lobby, I could see the weight of realization crushing his shoulders. "Jen," he said, his voice breaking as he pulled me into a hug. "I am so sorry. I believed them. I actually believed that Emma was dangerous and that you couldn't control her." Emma looked up from her laptop where she'd been reading news coverage of our parents' arrest. "Uncle David, what did they tell you about me?" David sat down heavily, running his hands through his hair. "They said you were using drugs, that you'd threatened to hurt Lily and Rose during your last visit to Colorado. They showed me photos they claimed were from your social media of you at parties with alcohol. They said you'd been caught stealing money from their wallets multiple times. But I've never been to Colorado," Emma said softly. "I haven't seen my cousins since they were babies. And I don't have social media accounts because Mom and I agreed I should wait until I'm 18. The devastating truth settled over David's face. "They showed me fake screenshots, didn't they? Those photos weren't even you." "Probably not," I confirmed. "The FBI found software on their computers for creating fake social media profiles and manipulating images. They've been manufacturing evidence against targeted children for years." David pulled out his phone and started scrolling through text messages. "Look at this. 3 years ago, Mom sent me this long message about how you were having a mental breakdown and that Emma was becoming violent because of the instability at home. She said Emma had attacked another student at school and that you were refusing to get her psychological help." Emma leaned over to read the messages, her face growing pale. "Uncle David, I've never been in a fight in my life. I volunteer at the animal shelter and tutor younger kids in math. The most violent thing I've ever done is swat flies. They isolated us from each other on purpose. I realized, the full scope of their manipulation becoming clear. They couldn't risk us comparing stories because we would have realized none of their claims made sense." David's phone rang, and I saw our cousin Michael's name on the screen. When David answered, Michael's voice was loud enough for us to hear. "David, I just saw the news about Uncle Robert and Aunt Margaret. Is it true they were arrested for fraud? Because I need to tell you something. They called me last month claiming Jennifer was trying to manipulate the family for money and that Emma had been diagnosed with serious psychological problems. Michael, it's all lies, David said, his voice shaking. Every single thing they told any of us about Jennifer and Emma was fabricated. We've been played for years. Over the next few hours, David's phone didn't stop ringing. Extended family members from across the country were calling, each with their own version of the lies my parents had told about Emma and me. The stories varied, but the goal was always the same: convince family members to distance themselves from us while painting my parents as long-suffering victims of our dysfunction. Aunt Sarah in Florida thought you were addicted to prescription drugs, David told me after hanging up from another call. Uncle Tom believed Emma had been arrested for shoplifting. Cousin Lisa was told that you'd been borrowing money from Mom and Dad and refusing to pay it back. Emma looked up from her laptop again. Uncle David, I've been reading the FBI press release about the investigation. They found evidence that Grandma and Grandpa did this to 47 families. We weren't the only ones they targeted. But it was David's next phone call that revealed the true extent of my parents' psychological manipulation. My cousin Jennifer in Arizona, who shared my name, had been told that I was jealous of her successful marriage and was turning Emma against the family out of spite. They told everyone different stories, David realized. But they made sure each story painted you and Emma as problems, while positioning themselves as innocent victims, trying to hold the family together. That evening, as we sat in the hotel restaurant, David asked the question that had been haunting him. Jen, why would they do this? What did they gain from destroying your relationship with Emma and isolating you from the family? The answer came from an unexpected source. Emma had been researching narcissistic personality disorder and family scapegoating dynamics for a school psychology project she'd been working on before the anniversary disaster. Mom, I think they needed to have someone to blame for everything that went wrong in their lives, Emma said, showing us articles on her laptop. In dysfunctional family systems, there's often a scapegoat who gets blamed for all the family's problems. I think I was their scapegoat from the moment I was born. David read over Emma's shoulder, his face growing darker with understanding. This article talks about how narcissistic grandparents often target grandchildren who represent what they see as family failures. Emma, you represented Mom's choice to be a single mother, which threatened their image of family perfection. But it goes deeper than that, I added, remembering the journal entries the FBI had found. They saw themselves as protectors of family purity. Emma threatened their narrative about proper family structure, so they decided she needed to be eliminated from the family. The conversation was interrupted by David's phone buzzing with a text from his wife, Carol. She had been showing their daughters photos from the FBI press releases, and the twins had immediately recognized their grandfather in the pictures. David, the girls remember Uncle Robert showing them photos of Emma and warning them to stay away from their dangerous cousin. They were scared of her before they even met her. He poisoned our children against their own cousin when they were barely old enough to understand. Emma's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief. Uncle David, I always wondered why Lily and Rose seemed afraid of me during video calls. Now I know it wasn't my fault. Grandpa taught them to be scared of me on purpose. But the most shocking revelation came when David called our Aunt Susan, who had witnessed the anniversary confrontation. Susan revealed that my parents had been planning Emma's public rejection for months, carefully orchestrating it to happen during their anniversary celebration, so maximum family members would witness what they called Emma's inevitable breakdown. They wanted everyone to see Emma get rejected and start crying, Susan told David over speakerphone. They thought it would prove she was unstable and validate all the stories they'd been telling about her behavioral problems. They had no idea Jennifer would stay calm and start investigating. They underestimated both Emma's strength and Mom's protective instincts. David said, looking at us with new admiration. They expected Emma to fall apart and you to accept their judgment. Instead, Emma held her head high and you declared war on them. As the evening continued, David shared more family dynamics that made sense in this new context. My parents had always pitted family members against each other, sharing selective information designed to create conflicts and dependencies. They had positioned themselves as the central authority figures whose approval was necessary for family inclusion. They were running a psychological operation against their own family, David realized. They kept us all separated and suspicious of each other, so we would depend on them for information about what was really happening. Emma closed her laptop and looked at her uncle with a maturity that shocked me. Uncle David, I forgive you for believing their lies about me. You were protecting your daughters based on information from people you trusted. Now that you know the truth, we can build a real relationship. David's eyes filled with tears as he reached across the table to take Emma's hand. Emma, you are nothing like what they described. You're intelligent, kind, and incredibly strong. I can't believe I missed out on knowing my amazing niece because I believed their manipulation. The important thing is that we know the truth now, Emma replied. Lily and Rose can finally meet their cousin without being scared, and you and Mom can be siblings again instead of strangers. As we sat together in that hotel restaurant, 3 generations of family members who had been systematically manipulated and separated by my parents' calculated cruelty, I realized that their ultimate plan had backfired completely. They had intended to destroy Emma's place in our family, but instead they had exposed their own twisted psychology and brought the rest of us closer together. The legal consequences were still unfolding, but the family healing had already begun. Emma would never again have to wonder why she felt unwelcome at family gatherings or why relatives seemed uncomfortable around her. David would never again have to wonder if his sister was the irresponsible parent he'd been told she was. My parents had spent years building walls between family members, but their arrest had torn down every barrier they'd constructed. For the first time in Emma's life, she was going to experience what it felt like to be unconditionally welcomed and loved by her extended family. The reckoning was far from over, but the healing had finally begun. 3 weeks after my parents' arrest, their legal team made one last desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative. Attorney Richard Sullivan, known for defending white-collar criminals, had taken their case and was preparing what he called a mental health defense that would paint me as unstable, and Emma as a troubled child who needed protection from my allegedly vindictive behavior. I learned about their strategy through Agent Martinez, who called me Tuesday morning with a warning that made my blood run cold. Jennifer, your parents are planning to claim that you manipulated Emma into making false accusations against them as revenge for their legitimate concerns about her behavioral problems. They're going to argue that they were trying to protect Emma from your psychological instability. How can they claim that when the FBI has documented evidence of their fraud? I asked, pacing around our hotel room while Emma got ready for school. Their attorney is claiming the financial crimes were accounting errors and that the insurance billing was handled by a third-party company they trusted. But more importantly, they're petitioning for emergency custody of Emma, claiming she's in danger from your mental state. Emma froze in the bathroom doorway, her school backpack falling from her shoulder. They're still trying to take me away from you. Agent Martinez continued over speakerphone so Emma could hear. Their petition claims that Jennifer has been coaching Emma to lie about her grandparents, that the viral video was a calculated attack on innocent elderly people, and that Emma needs protection from her mother's vindictive and unstable behavior. The audacity was staggering. My parents were attempting to use the same tactics that had worked for years, positioning themselves as concerned family members trying to protect a child from an unfit parent. But this time, they had underestimated the power of documented evidence and my preparation for their psychological warfare. Agent Martinez, when is the custody hearing scheduled? I asked, already formulating my response. Friday morning. But Jennifer, there's something else you need to know. Your parents have hired a private investigator who's been following you and Emma for the past week. They're trying to build a case that you're psychologically unstable. Emma's face went white, but then I saw something I'd never seen before in her expression. Cold, calculated anger. My daughter was done being a victim. Mom, Emma said, her voice steady and determined. I want to testify at the custody hearing. I want to tell the judge exactly what kind of people they really are. That afternoon, I met with our attorney, Linda Harrison, who specialized in family law and had been following the federal case closely. Linda had offered to represent us pro bono after seeing the news coverage, and she had spent weeks preparing for exactly this scenario. Jennifer, your parents are making a critical mistake, Linda explained, spreading case files across her conference table. They're assuming that their professional credentials and community standing will carry more weight than documented evidence. But family court judges take federal criminal charges very seriously. What's their strongest argument? I asked, needing to understand the full scope of what we were facing. They're claiming that your decision to record them without consent and post it publicly demonstrates poor judgment and potential mental instability. They're arguing that a stable parent would have handled the situation through proper family channels rather than social media exposure. Emma leaned forward from her chair beside me. But they planned to humiliate me publicly at their anniversary party. They wanted everyone to see me get rejected. How is that different from mom showing everyone who they really are? That's exactly the argument we'll make, Linda replied, smiling at Emma's logic. But Emma, are you sure you want to testify? It means facing your grandparents in court and answering difficult questions about your experiences. Emma's answer surprised both of us. Mrs. Harrison, I've been thinking about all the other kids who were hurt by them. If I don't speak up, some judge might believe their lies and give them access to hurt more children. I need to tell the truth so this never happens again. Linda nodded approvingly. In that case, we're going to need to prepare thoroughly. Your grandparents' attorney will try to make you seem like a troubled teenager who's been coached to lie. We need to document your actual character and achievements. That evening, Linda's preparation revealed the full extent of my parents' desperation. They had submitted 47 pages of fabricated documentation about Emma's supposed behavioral problems, including fake incident reports from school, manufactured medical records, and falsified psychological assessments. They're claiming Emma has been diagnosed with oppositional defiant disorder, conduct disorder, and borderline personality disorder, Linda explained, reading from their custody petition. They've submitted treatment recommendations including residential therapy and possible medication. Emma looked at the fake medical records with amazement rather than fear. Mrs. Harrison, I've never been diagnosed with anything except mild seasonal allergies. My school counselor can testify that I've never been in trouble, and my pediatrician has records showing my mental health has always been normal. That's exactly what we need, Linda replied. But Emma, you should know that your grandparents are going to be in that courtroom. They're going to look at you with disappointment and claim you're breaking their hearts by lying about them. Can you handle that emotional pressure? Emma's response revealed how much she had grown over the past month. Mrs. Harrison, they trained me my whole life to feel guilty for disappointing them. But now I know that everything I felt guilty about was based on lies they told me about myself. They can't manipulate me anymore because I finally understand what they really are. Friday morning arrived with media attention that none of us had anticipated. The custody hearing had become a public spectacle, with local news stations covering what they called the family therapy fraud case. Emma walked into the courthouse wearing her best dress, carrying a folder of character references from teachers, volunteer coordinators, and family friends who had known her throughout her life. When my parents entered the courtroom with their attorney, I watched Emma's face carefully for signs of emotional manipulation. But instead of the guilt and confusion I expected, I saw something remarkable. Pity. Emma looked at her grandparents with genuine sadness for what they had become, rather than fear of their disapproval. The hearing began with Attorney Sullivan presenting my parents' case. He painted a picture of concerned grandparents who had tried to help a troubled teenager and protect her from an unstable mother's vindictive behavior. He claimed their arrest was the result of my manipulation of federal investigators and that Emma was a victim of my coaching rather than their abuse. But when Linda presented our evidence, the entire courtroom atmosphere changed. She played portions of my recorded conversation with my parents, showing the calculated nature of their plan to humiliate Emma. She presented documentation of the insurance fraud, identity theft, and fabricated medical records. She showed the court 47 families who had been similarly manipulated by Harmony Family Counseling. Then Emma took the stand. Your Honor, Emma began, her voice clear and confident. My grandparents didn't reject me because I was a bad kid. They rejected me because I represented something they couldn't control. I was evidence that their daughter had made choices they disapproved of, and they decided to punish me for existing. Attorney Sullivan tried to interrupt, claiming Emma was reciting coached responses, but Judge Patricia Morrison raised her hand for silence. Continue, Emma. Judge Morrison said, Tell me about your relationship with your grandparents in your own words. Your Honor, I spent 16 years wondering why I never felt loved by them the way my cousins did. I thought there was something wrong with me because family gatherings always felt uncomfortable. Now I know it wasn't my imagination. They were systematically poisoning my relationships with other family members while making me feel guilty for disappointing them. Emma pulled out her folder of character references. These are letters from my teachers, my volunteer coordinator at the animal shelter, my church youth group leader, and my school counselor. They all describe the same person. Someone who's responsible, kind, and emotionally stable. The person my grandparents described to the family doesn't exist. When Attorney Sullivan cross-examined Emma, attempting to make her seem coached or rehearsed, she responded with a directness that shocked the courtroom. Mr. Sullivan, are you asking me if my mother taught me to lie about my grandparents? Because what my mother taught me was that I deserved to be loved for who I actually am, not rejected for who they pretended I was. They committed federal crimes using my identity while convincing the family I was dangerous. That's not love, that's abuse. Judge Morrison's ruling was swift and decisive. Not only did she deny my parents' custody petition, she issued a restraining order preventing them from contacting Emma directly or indirectly until she reached adulthood. She also ordered supervised visitation only, noting that their demonstrated pattern of psychological manipulation made unsupervised contact dangerous for Emma's well-being. The evidence presented today shows a systematic pattern of emotional abuse, financial exploitation, and deliberate psychological manipulation directed at a minor child. Judge Morrison stated, "The petitioner's claims of concern for Emma's welfare are contradicted by their documented actions. This court finds that Emma's safety and emotional well-being require protection from further contact with her grandparents." As we left the courthouse, Emma turned to look back at my parents one final time. Margaret and Robert sat at their attorney's table looking smaller and older than I had ever seen them, their faces reflecting the dawning realization that their manipulation tactics would never work again. "Mom," Emma said as we walked toward our car, "I don't hate them. I actually feel sorry for them. They spent so many years trying to destroy love that they forgot how to recognize it when they had it." The final confrontation was over, but more importantly, it had ended with Emma's complete emotional freedom from their psychological control. They would never again be able to make her feel unworthy of love or belonging. The legal consequences would continue unfolding for months, but the emotional victory was complete and permanent. 6 months later, I stood in the courthouse lobby reading the final sentencing documents that would close the legal chapter of our nightmare. Federal Judge William Patterson had sentenced my father Robert to 12 years in federal prison for insurance fraud, identity theft, and wire fraud. My mother Margaret received 10 years for the same charges, with both sentences to be served consecutively with additional state charges for professional misconduct and child endangerment. "Jennifer," Agent Martinez approached me with a folder of restitution documents. "The court has ordered your parents to pay full restitution to all victims, including Emma's stolen inheritance and credit restoration costs. The total comes to over $800,000 between federal and civil judgments." Emma, now 17 and preparing for her senior year, looked up from the college brochures she'd been studying. "Agent Martinez, what happened to their therapy practice? Harmony Family Counseling has been permanently shut down, and your grandparents have been banned from practicing therapy anywhere in the United States. The state licensing board has also flagged their case as an example of severe professional misconduct for educational purposes." The financial justice was satisfying, but the personal transformation was even more meaningful. Emma's college fund had been fully restored with interest, her credit had been completely cleared, and she had been accepted to 3 universities with merit scholarships based on her academic achievements and community service work. But the most important change was in Emma herself. The confident, articulate young woman sitting beside me bore little resemblance to the uncertain girl who had stood on my parents' porch 6 months ago, wondering why she felt unwelcome in her own family. "Mom, Dr. Patricia Wells called this morning," Emma said, closing her college brochures. "She wanted to let us know that her daughter Sarah is starting college next semester too. They're planning to apply to the same university so they can support each other through the transition." Dr. Patricia Wells had become an unexpected ally and friend. The pediatrician had spent months rebuilding her relationship with her adopted daughter Sarah, who had been institutionalized based on my parents' false professional recommendations. Patricia's journey of healing with her daughter had paralleled our own family recovery. 23 families have been reunited because of our investigation, I told Emma, reviewing the final FBI report. "Children who were separated from their parents based on your grandparents' lies are going home. Teenagers who were sent to residential facilities they didn't need are being released. Parents who thought their children were dangerous are learning they were manipulated. Emma smiled, but it was a mature smile that reflected hard-won wisdom rather than simple happiness. Mom, I've been thinking about something. I want to study family psychology in college, but I want to focus on protecting families from manipulation rather than enabling it. The news of Emma's career plans filled me with pride. But it was her next statement that showed how completely she had healed from my parents' psychological abuse. I want to help other kids who are dealing with family scapegoating and emotional manipulation. I understand what it feels like to be told you're the problem, when the real problem is adults who abuse their authority. Maybe I can help prevent other families from going through what we experienced. Our extended family had undergone its own healing process. My brother David had moved his family from Colorado to Michigan, wanting his daughters to grow up knowing their cousin Emma without the interference of manipulative grandparents. The twins, Lily and Rose, had quickly bonded with Emma, who had become the protective older cousin they'd never been allowed to have. Uncle David is bringing the girls over for dinner tonight, Emma told me, checking her phone. They want to hear about my college plans, and I promised to help them with their science project about genetics. It's funny they're not scared of me anymore now that they know Grandpa's stories about me were lies. The community response had been overwhelming. Harmony Family Counseling's former office space had been converted into a resource center for families affected by professional therapy abuse. The Grand Rapids Chamber of Commerce had established an ethics committee to prevent future situations where professional credentials could be used to manipulate vulnerable families. But it was the personal relationships that meant the most to Emma. Relatives who had been distant or uncomfortable around her for years had reached out with apologies and invitations. Cousins who had been taught to fear her were discovering they enjoyed her company. Aunts and uncles who had believed lies about her character were learning who she really was. Cousin Michael called yesterday. Emma told me, grinning. He wants me to be a bridesmaid in his wedding next summer. He said he feels terrible about believing Grandma and Grandpa's stories about me, and he wants to make up for lost time. The wedding invitation was symbolic of Emma's complete restoration to our family. She would never again have to wonder if she belonged or worry that relatives viewed her as problematic. The lies that had shadowed her entire childhood had been permanently exposed and replaced with truth. As we drove home from the courthouse that afternoon, Emma asked me the question I'd been expecting for months. Mom, do you think they'll ever understand what they did to us? I considered my answer carefully, wanting to give Emma closure without false hope. Emma, I think they convinced themselves that their behavior was justified because they saw themselves as protecting the family from what they considered problems. They may never accept responsibility for the harm they caused, but that doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that you know the truth about who you are. Emma nodded thoughtfully. I've forgiven them, Mom, but not because they deserve it. I forgave them because carrying anger was hurting me more than it was hurting them. Now I can focus on building the life I want instead of trying to prove I deserved the love they couldn't give. The maturity in her response reminded me that while my parents had tried to destroy Emma's sense of self-worth, they had inadvertently given her something valuable: the ability to recognize manipulation and the strength to resist it. She would enter adulthood with psychological tools that many people never develop. That evening, as David's family joined us for dinner and I watched Emma laughing with her cousins, I realized that my parents' ultimate plan had backfired in the most complete way possible. They had intended to eliminate Emma from our family, but instead they had eliminated themselves while bringing the rest of us closer together. Emma was no longer the isolated, uncertain girl who wondered why she felt unwelcome at family gatherings. She was a confident young woman surrounded by relatives who genuinely loved and valued her, preparing for a future where she would help protect other children from the kind of psychological abuse she had overcome. The justice was complete, but more importantly, the healing was real and permanent. As I tucked the legal documents into our family file, marking the official end of our legal battle, I reflected on the life lesson that had emerged from this painful experience. True family is built on unconditional love and mutual respect, not manipulation and control. When adults use their authority to harm children rather than protect them, it's not just the children's responsibility to adapt, it's everyone's responsibility to stand up and defend the vulnerable. Emma had learned that she deserved love for who she authentically was, not conditional acceptance based on meeting impossible standards set by damaged adults. I had learned that protecting our children sometimes means making difficult choices that challenge family authority structures. Our extended family had learned that silence in the face of manipulation enables abuse to continue. Most importantly, We had all learned that truth has the power to heal relationships that seemed permanently broken, and to restore justice when institutional authority fails to protect the innocent. Have you ever had to choose between keeping family peace and protecting someone you love from emotional abuse? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below about how families can better recognize and prevent psychological manipulation before it causes lasting harm. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about family resilience and healing. Sharing this story might help other families recognize similar patterns of manipulation in their own relationships and find the courage to seek justice and healing. Thank you for listening to our journey from betrayal to justice. Remember that every child deserves to be loved for who they are, not punished for who they're not. Stay strong, protect the vulnerable, and never underestimate the power of truth to transform even the most damaged family relationships.